Okay, we're going to do a little review on the DJI Avata Drone. This is it right here. It's a great little drone. It's pretty small and pretty light compared to the original. And this is the second FPV drone in the DJI lineup. The first one was the original DJI FPV drone. This is a great drone, but it's I think it's around 800 grams, almost double the weight of its smaller brother here. This drone here is really fast. It'll do 62 miles an hour in sport mode and about 34 miles an hour in normal mode. It's really meant for wide open spaces. It's much bigger, much heavier. It's not as maneuverable. And the main thing about it is it's not going to survive a severe crash. The arms will snap off pretty easily. That's why I put this additional bracing on here to kind of give it some reinforcement. Now the Avata here is really designed for flying really low. It's a lot slower, about half the speed of the FPV drone. So it'll do like 31, 32 miles an hour in sport mode, and I think it's around 18 max in normal mode. Most of the time I fly this drone in normal mode. And because I'm generally flying really low to the ground, like between 1 and 6 feet at 15, 16 miles an hour, trying to avoid obstacles, going back and forth. I wouldn't want to try that with this one because it's just too risky. This is great, like I said, for wide open spaces. This is really good for smaller landscapes, and that's what I really like it for. Now the beauty of this drone is it's a Cinewhoop, so it has these propeller guards all the way around it, and that makes it really safe. If you accidentally bump into somebody, you're probably not going to hurt them. You're not going to cut them up. This thing here, it's a little bit different story. The other really nice thing about this, it's actually a really great cinematic drone. And so it has two different modes on the camera. It has rock steady, which is more for FPV. So when you bank and it's in rock steady mode, the horizon will tilt from left to right. When it's in horizon steady, the horizon, even when you're banking sharply in NRS mode, doesn't matter, that horizon is going to stay perfectly flat. It actually just kind of crops in on the total frame and provides you with a nice flat cinematic look, similar to like a Mini 1 or a Mini 2 or any of the other cinematic drones out there. Now another thing about this drone is it's not really going to fly in windy conditions like its bigger brother. If you get a strong wind with this, and let's say it's a crosswind, the drone is actually going to fly at an angle like that. So you're going to see that in the horizon if you have it on rock steady. If you have it in the horizon steady, it's going to flatten it out. So that's pretty nice, but it'll still pitch around a lot. You'll see that in the goggles. So I kind of prefer the rock steady for most of my flying because I like the FPV look and as far as the final video. But I do prefer the horizon steady when it gets windy, because it just locks everything in, and I don't, on rock steady, if it's windy, it's going to be bouncing around like that a lot, and yeah. So 80% of the time I fly the Avata in N mode. I really like N mode for flying low and reasonably fast, 15, 18 miles an hour, somewhere between 1 and 4 feet above the ground. And at that speed, the goggles provide enough vision to be able to see obstacles and avoid them and just really get that nice high-speed look over the ground, even though you're not going that all fast. I will put it in sport mode if I want to return home or if I want to get across a valley at a little bit higher elevation. Generally then I try to stay, above 6 feet, maybe around 10 feet, something like that, so to make sure I don't actually hit something. Now for flight times, I'm getting between about 11 to 14 minutes. That's flying a combination of N and S mode. Most of my flying is in N mode, probably 80% of the time, maybe 20% of the time I'm in S mode. And yeah, like I said, 11 to about 14 minutes. That's starting off at around 98, 99% with a full battery and dropping it all the way down below 20%, sometimes as low as 7 or 8%. And try to make sure that I'm close to home when I get down below 15. But anyway, it's got a pretty good battery life, and I think that's great. And compared to the FPV drone, I was only getting about 6 minutes in sport mode on this drone. It's a great drone, but it drops the battery down very quickly. Now before I had the FPV drone, I had the Mini 1 and the Mini 2 from DJI. And they're great little drones, but they're primarily just cinematic drones. And I have to admit that since I've gotten the Avata, I went ahead and sold those because this will do essentially everything they'll do. And actually has a really good camera that I think is better than either one of those. Camera on both of these drones is really good. This one's supposed to be a little bit better. It has a larger aperture, so it can fly in lower light and provide a pretty good image still. So I bought this drone as just a standalone drone with, actually got 2 batteries with it to increase my flight time. I'm using the same controller that I used for the DJI FPV drone. And I'm also using the goggles. I don't have the new goggles version 2, I think. Anyway, these are the old V2 goggles. To me, these are fine. They work just great. I don't have the motion controller. A lot of people are flying with the motion controller because that's all this drone comes with now when you buy it, when you buy the combination. The motion controller is probably a good idea because you cannot fly it in manual with the motion controller. If you use this controller, you can fly it in manual, and that's great. And I've done it with the old drone. It is a little bit high risk. Problem with this one here is that this is a Cinewhip, and the design of this is such that they're known to actually get washout and sometimes rotate from an extremely high bank or high turn and fall out of the sky. A lot of people have been experiencing that. So I'm not going to fly it in manual, even though I originally had planned on it, but seeing what's happening to other people, I think I'm just going to stick with normal and sport mode. Kind of the advantage too of flying in normal and sport mode, even amongst the guys that are really good FPV pilots, is you have just really good, outstanding control of your elevation. Because when this left stick over here is neutral, the drone will just maintain that elevation. So if you're flying over a flat terrain, you can just use your height indicator, which is in the goggles, and just kind of maintain it really accurately without worry about hitting the ground as much. In the FPV mode, that would be a function of the right stick. And I've noticed that a lot of the FPV guys, when they're flying these one-shots and everything, they're actually flying it in normal mode or in sport mode and not in FPV mode. Some will, it's a matter of personal preference. But there's something to be said for a drone that can fly FPV using the mode that is actually used for most cinematic drones. I really like that. Now, one of the favorite things I like about this drone and the FPV drone is there are sensors on the bottom of this drone that bounce a signal off the ground and send it back to the drone and back to the goggles. And the goggles will actually read out the altitude above the ground up to about 30 feet. So when you get close to the ground, you can kind of keep an eye on your actual altitude, and it lets you know when you're getting really close. If you get down below about 5 feet, it's time to start paying real strong attention to detail of what you're seeing in the goggles so you can avoid hitting the ground or whatever. And of course, that's speed dependent. The faster you're going, the better, the higher up you better be. But I think that's just a really useful function. I don't know of any other FPV drones that have that particular functionality. So that's something I really like. What I'd like to do now is show you a little bit about how I got into this hobby through RC planes. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the first 47 flights that I've actually got on this. I'll just show the highlights and maybe explain a little bit about what's going on. And just give you an idea of the kind of video and the kind of flying that this thing was designed for. And here's how I got into this hobby. I started flying these RC planes here around 10 years ago. And then I sort of transitioned over into the drones. And here's a few more over here. So these are all electric, and just like the drone is here. And what they all have in common is they have a ESC, that's an electronic speed controller. And that really allows these motors to be controlled precisely. That's kind of how these drones got started, is out of the RC hop. And here's what the RC controller looks like for these planes. Okay, so the controllers on drones originated out of the RC world. And the controls on the RC controller for RC planes, the sticks are set up just like they are on a regular plane. So the right stick would be your yoke or the stick in a plane, if it has a stick control. Move it back, you activate the elevator, and the tail goes down. Forward, the nose would go down. So that's pitch control. And then left and right is your bank. That activates the ailerons on the plane to turn it or to bank it. Now, to actually turn the plane, you need to activate the rudder, which is in the back of the plane. And when you go forward and backward, that gives it more power to actually climb. A coordinated turn on a plane requires the use of both the left stick and the right stick, and so that you have yaw and bank going at the same time. That keeps the center of gravity directly straight down in the aircraft. So FPV drones like the DJI FPV drone or the Avata, they're set up just like RC planes. So your left stick is your rudder and your power, and the right stick is your bank and your pitch. Now the Avata has 3 different modes: manual, sport, and normal. And the stick descriptions that we just went over would apply only to the manual mode when it's actually being flown like a normal FPV drone. Now most people will fly this drone in normal or sport mode. There's sport mode and normal. When you fly it like that, it becomes a cinematic drone, similar to a Mini 1 or a Mini 2. And the stick inputs are a little bit different in normal and sport. The left stick now controls your altitude, move it up or down. It'll just sit and hover right like that. You move it left or right to actually turn the yaw of the aircraft. And the right stick now controls your speed. Move it up for forward, all the way back to 0 speed, and move it down for reverse. Left becomes your left bank, and right, of course, becomes your right. To make a coordinated turn, you want to apply equal amounts of left and right stick. So if you're turning to the left, for example, you'd use a little bit of left rudder and a little bit of left bank. The same thing if you're going to the right. If you just want to rotate the aircraft without actually using any bank, then of course you would just use your left stick, left or right, and it'll just sit there and yaw left or right. If you want the aircraft to bank to the right or the left without actually turning, then you would just use the right stick.